Harper, have always been the kind of person who defends summer as a hill I'm willing to die on. While my friends complain about the humidity frizzing their hair and scramble for the nearest coffee shop with industrial-grade air conditioning, I'm usually the one soaking up that golden hour glow, the one who lives for those long, sticky evenings that beg you to stay out on the fire escape until 2 a.m. I thrive in the sun, or at least, I thought I did. However, that particular July was testing my seasonal loyalty to its absolute breaking point. This wasn't normal heat. It was a living, breathing entity, heavy and oppressive, sitting on your chest like a lead weight. But before we continue, if you enjoy true stories that explore the boundaries of the heart, we need your support. Help us reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell. I'd love to know which part of the world you're watching from. Leave it in the comments below. It was one of those historic heat domes that the news anchors were breathlessly naming with apocalyptic flair. The Great Fry, Heatpocalypse, the Scorch. The air was so thick you could practically chew it, tasting of ozone and hot asphalt. Down on the street, the pavement was radiating a shimmering vapor that distorted the horizon, making the skyscrapers look like they were melting into a Salvador Dali painting. I was in my apartment, a 7th-floor walk-up that used to be my sanctuary, my little boho retreat from the city grind. But now it felt more like a terrarium under a heat lamp, and I was the lizard waiting to expire. The ceiling fan was spinning frantically on its highest setting, making a rhythmic, slightly concerning clicking sound. Clack, 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 that was threatening to either hypnotize me or drive me into a state of madness. I hadn't quite decided which one yet. I was sprawled out on my vintage velvet sofa, a piece of furniture I usually adored but which now felt like a heater against my skin. I was trying to read a paperback, but the pages were tacky with humidity, sticking to my fingertips every time I tried to turn them. Dressed in the lightest oversized t-shirt I owned, I was simply trying to exist without dissolving into a puddle. That was when the sound of knuckles rapping against the wood of my front door broke the trance of my lethargy. I lifted my head, heavy and groggy. It was strange. Nobody came up to the 7th floor without buzzing. The intercom first. Unless I dragged myself up and opened the door to find Liam, my neighbor from 7B. I knew him, of course. In a building like ours, you learn to recognize your neighbors by the cadence of their footsteps and the silence they keep. Liam was the guy with the shy smile in the hallway, the one with the polite "good morning," and the gaze that always seemed to linger just a fraction of a second longer than was socially necessary, yet never long enough to cross the line into creepy. We had never exchanged more than 3 consecutive sentences, usually revolving around the weather or the recycling schedule, but that afternoon, Liam wasn't the composed, quiet neighbor I was used to. He was standing on my threshold with an expression that oscillated somewhere between profound embarrassment and pure desperation. He was wearing a dark gray cotton t-shirt that was clinging to his torso like a second skin due to the sweat, outlining the tension in his shoulders and the rapid rise and fall of his chest. His dark hair was damp, with a few rogue strands plastered to his forehead, giving him a disheveled look that, to my immense surprise, I found strangely compelling amidst the climatic chaos. "Harper, I am so incredibly sorry to bother you like this," he said, running a nervous hand over the back of his neck, a gesture that highlighted the flex of his bicep. "But you wouldn't happen to have a Phillips head screwdriver, would you? My window unit decided to die. Right now, it made this horrific grinding noise and just gave up the ghost. I need to crack it open to see if I can do anything before I literally melt into the floorboards." I couldn't help but let out a short laugh, a mixture of sympathy and startled nerves. "Please, come in. I understand the emergency level completely. We're on the verge of liquefaction in here too," I joked, stepping aside to let him enter the narrow hallway. When Liam crossed the threshold and brushed past me, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted instantly. It wasn't just his physical presence, which seemed to fill the space in a way it hadn't been filled in years, but the scent he brought with him. It was an unmistakable blend of high summer, the smell of overheated skin, a hint of salt, mixed with a trace of sandalwood cologne that somehow persisted despite the sweltering heat. It was a primal, honest scent, and it sent an immediate shiver racing down my spine, completely contradicting the 90-degree temperature of the room. I headed to the kitchen to dig out my toolbox. "I actually know a thing or two about this," I called out over my shoulder, as I rummaged through the chaotic junk drawer every apartment has. My dad was one of those guys who believed knowing how to fix things was just as important as knowing how to read. He raised me not to be afraid of a few wires. I returned with the screwdriver in hand and held it out to him. But instead of just handing it over and sending him back to his sauna of an apartment, I found myself speaking before my brain could filter the thought. Do you want me to come over? Maybe 2 heads are better than 1. And honestly, any distraction is better than just sitting here waiting for the sun to go down. Liam smiled, and the expression seemed to illuminate his tired, flushed face. I would appreciate that more than you know. Seriously. We walked the 10 feet that separated our front doors, but the short journey felt like crossing a portal into another dimension. His apartment was a mirror image of mine in layout, but the soul of the place was entirely different. It was tidy, masculine but warm, with stacks of books on the side tables and an acoustic guitar resting on a stand in the corner. But the heat was infernal. The air was stagnant, heavy as a lead blanket. I felt a bead of sweat trace a slow, deliberate line down my spine. Liam headed straight for the window AC unit mounted in the living room. He popped the front plastic cover off with movements that were quick but careful. I stepped closer to observe, my curiosity piquing. I think the issue is right inside here, he said, pointing to an internal component near the fan blade. I leaned in to get a better look, and in that movement, our arms grazed. It was a minimal contact, damp skin against damp skin, but the effect was devastatingly electric. It was as if we had closed an invisible circuit. I instinctively pulled back a millimeter, but every cell in my body was screaming to bridge that gap again. It looks like the casing is vibrating loose. You just need to tighten that mounting screw right there, I said, my voice sounding a pitch higher than usual. I tried to focus on the mechanics, on the cold logic of metal and plastic, to distract myself from the overwhelming proximity of his body. Liam leaned in closer to see exactly where my finger was pointing. Where exactly? He asked. His voice had dropped an octave, becoming a low, vibrating rumble that I felt in my chest. I could feel his breath on my cheek, hot and ragged. The concept of personal space had ceased to exist. When I reached out to point at the screw again, he placed his hand over mine to guide the tip of the screwdriver into the slot. His palm was large, warm, and calloused. In that instant, time seemed to suspend itself. The suffocating heat of the apartment faded into the background. Or rather, it transformed. It was no longer an atmospheric nuisance. It became the fuel for what was igniting between us. With his hand covering mine, I felt a chain reaction start deep in my gut. My muscles tensed, not out of fear, but out of a primitive anticipation. My heart began to hammer against my ribs with a force that echoed in my ears, and my breath hitched. It was as if all the heat of July had condensed into the 3 inches of air separating our faces. Harper, he whispered. I turned my head and found his dark eyes locked onto mine. We were inches apart. I could see the flecks of gold in his irises. I could see the raw, unfiltered desire reflected in his gaze. And in that moment, I felt something harden inside me. It wasn't just the physical tension of my muscles coiling for action. It was something deeper, something almost spiritual. I felt a steely determination being forged, a courage that had been dormant for too long. My entire body was bracing itself for something I couldn't define with words, but that my instincts recognized as vital. It was the absolute certainty that I was standing on a precipice, and I was about to jump. The heat, which moments ago had been draining me, now amplified every sensation. Every drop of sweat was a reminder that we were alive. Here, right now. Every shared breath was a thread being woven between us. Standing there with Liam so close I could feel the heat radiating from his chest, I understood that this summer wasn't going to be like the others. I felt my defenses, those walls we build to keep from getting hurt, hardening in a way that protected my resolve while simultaneously crumbling to let him in. It was a fascinating contradiction. For the first time in a long time, I wanted someone to invade my space. We stood motionless, staring at each other, and I felt every nerve ending in my body on high alert. The temperature in the apartment felt like it had spiked another 10 degrees, but now the source of the heat was coming from within, a kinetic energy I had never experienced with such magnitude. You're shaking, Liam observed. His voice was husky, barely recognizable. It was true. My hands had a slight tremor, but it wasn't weakness. It was adrenaline. It was my body vibrating on a new frequency. "It's just the heat," I lied, though we both knew it was a white lie. It wasn't the weather. It was the way he was looking at me, as if he were discovering a new continent on the map of my face. Liam pulled back just a fraction, enough to let us breathe, but not enough to break the spell. "Let's try to tighten that screw. It might need a bit more torque," he said, turning his attention back to the machine, though his movements were noticeably less fluid than before. I positioned myself beside him again, this time to get the right angle for the leverage. He moved behind me. I felt his chest press against my back, his arms coming around mine to reach the tool. In that instant, my entire body went rigid. I turned into a block of pure sensation. I felt something in my character solidify. My determination, my courage, my will to stay in this fire. It all took a definite shape. I was no longer the shy neighbor. I was a woman fully conscious of her desire and her power. "Can you hold it steady?" he asked right by my ear, his breath causing a wildfire across my neck. "I can," I replied. My voice came out firm, decisive, surprising even me. I felt my stance ground itself, my feet planted into the floor, my muscles contracting with a strength I didn't know I possessed. We worked together for a few minutes that felt like hours, in a silent choreography charged with sexual tension. Every movement was saturated with energy. If he shifted right, I compensated left. Our bodies were in constant friction. A forearm, a shoulder, a hip. Suddenly, a deep, booming sound shook the window frames. Thunder. The wind changed direction abruptly, blasting through the open window and bringing with it a gust of cool air that made the curtains dance. Wildly. The temperature dropped a few degrees in a matter of seconds. I felt goosebumps rise on my skin, a confusing mix of the sudden chill and sustained excitement. "Looks like the storm is finally breaking," Liam commented, but he didn't pull away. He stayed there, pressed against my back, and I could smell the rain approaching, mixing with his scent. Finally, the screw gave way and tightened into place. Liam exhaled and turned me around to face him, a smile of triumph on his lips. "I think that's it. It should work now." We were face to face again. I could see the track of a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. I felt my breath catch. That internal sensation of hardening, of fortitude, reached its peak. It was an absolute certainty. I wanted this moment to freeze in time. "Liam," I started to say, not quite knowing what was going to tumble out of my mouth. He lifted his hand and, with an infinite delicacy that contrasted with his strong, working hands, touched my cheek, closed my eyes at the contact. "You're incredible, Harper," he said. Those simple words acted like a catalyst. I felt my self-esteem, my sense of self, steel itself. "I always thought you were special, but today, there's something different about you." I opened my eyes. The intensity of his stare disarmed me. Outside, the sky broke open, and the rain began to fall. First fat, heavy drops, and then a torrential downpour. The sound of water hammering against the glass created an acoustic bubble, isolating us from the rest of the world. The entire universe shrank down to these few square feet of his living room. "The rain is going to cool everything down," he murmured, his thumb gently stroking my cheekbone. "I hope so," I whispered back. "But honestly, I don't want anything to change right now." I wanted to stay there, inhabiting this delicious tension, feeling this strength growing inside me. He leaned in slowly, giving me all the time in the world to back away if I wanted to. But I didn't back away. On the contrary, my body leaned toward him like a sunflower seeking the light, as if it were the most natural physical law in the universe. When our lips finally met, it was a controlled explosion. I felt my whole being harden and melt simultaneously. It was a kiss that started soft, testing the waters, but quickly charged with all the accumulated tension of months of elevator glances and that suffocating afternoon. I felt my body respond with avidity, every fiber, contracting and relaxing in an instinctive dance. We pulled apart for a moment to catch our breath, both panting, not from the heat, but from the intensity of the encounter. Liam looked at me with a mix of awe and adoration. "That was," he started. "Inevitable," I finished, still feeling the tingle on my lips. Outside, the storm roared, scrubbing the air clean, bringing that smell of wet earth, petrichor, which is the perfume of relief. But inside the apartment, the heat had transformed. It was, no longer an oppression. It was a hearth that warmed us from the inside. I felt more alive, stronger, more myself than ever before. I understood then that there are discoveries worth more than any exotic trip. Sometimes when someone special gets close enough, they awaken capabilities in us we ignored. That afternoon with Liam, I discovered a version of myself I didn't know. A bold Harper, capable of taking what she wants, capable of feeling with abysmal depth. We stayed hugged there while the rain washed the city clean. I felt an internal transformation complete itself. It wasn't just a racing heart. It was a new emotional structure solidifying. You know, Harper, Liam said, toying with a strand of my hair, I always wanted the courage to actually talk to you. You always seemed so sure of yourself, so unreachable. I smiled against his chest. He didn't know that. In that precise moment, I felt stronger than ever, but in a different way. It was the strength that is born from shared vulnerability. I always wanted to know you too, I admitted, my voice ringing with crystalline clarity. But I never imagined it would be like this, fixing your AC in the middle of a climate apocalypse. He let out a deep laugh that reverberated in my chest. The best breakdown of my life, he joked, squeezing me tighter. We spent the rest of the afternoon there, talking, discovering each other layer by layer. Every story we shared, every fear confessed, made that sensation of strength grow. When he told me about his frustrated dreams and his hopes, I felt my resolve to be there, with him, become unbreakable. The rain had brought coolness, but between us, that special heat, that vital energy, persisted. When you came over to help me, he said later, looking at me with that intensity that threw me off balance, I knew I had been waiting for that moment without knowing it. Those words finished sealing the silent pact between us. It was as if every experience of my life had served to harden my character and prepare me to hold this moment fully. When the storm passed and the sunset dyed the clouds in violent shades of violet and orange, I knew something fundamental had shifted. I hadn't just met Liam. I had recognized myself. I had discovered a woman capable of surrender, of trust, and of living without breaks. The AC works now, he said, turning the unit on with the remote. A blast of icy air began to flow, contrasting with the vibe. That's good, I said, though deep down, the artificial cold didn't matter anymore. I had my own source of heat. He kissed me once more, and I felt the same visceral reaction. It was the confirmation that some waits are worth it. Today, every time I think about that July afternoon, I smile. It was the day I learned that true closeness isn't just physical. It's finding someone who makes you feel brave, who gives you the strength to embrace the unexpected. Liam taught me that when the right person gets close, we feel things we thought impossible, muscles that tense with expectation, a heart that doubles its rhythm, and a determination that hardens and turns to steel. Because at the end of the day, that was what I felt, something hardening inside me. My courage, my desire to live, my capacity to love. It was the discovery that true strength doesn't reside in being invulnerable, but in having the courage to open up and let another see who you really are. And you? Have you ever felt that transformation when someone special gets too close? Have you experienced that sensation of something strengthening inside you, be it courage, determination, or simply the certainty that there are moments made to be lived to the fullest? Tell me your story in the comments, because every true connection deserves to be celebrated and shared.